I've been riding bikes for the better part of 30 years, and I've spent a lot of that time maintaining bikes both personally and professionally. And one of the things that I've observed is that the drivetrain is one of the most overlooked areas on the bike. So in this video, I'm going to give you 5 easy tips that you can use to keep things running smoothly and to maximize the life of your precious drivetrain. If this is your first time here, thanks for dropping by. This channel features product reviews, technical how-tos, and some pretty nerdy deep dives into the world of cycling, all filtered through an extra average cyclist with a technical background. If you like this type of content, then hitting the subscribe button is the best way to let me know and to make sure that you don't miss out on future videos like this. Okay, so some of these tips on drivetrain care have to do with riding technique, and others have to do with basic maintenance. But if you do all or most of these on a regular basis, then you can be sure to get the most out of your drivetrain and avoid having to prematurely replace components. So the first one is something that I see almost every time I go out on a ride, and that's when I see people shifting while the drivetrain is under a lot of stress. Now this almost always happens while climbing uphill, as cyclists need to adjust their gear ratio to the grade. And it's pretty clear when it happens, as you can hear it from a mile away. It's that telltale mechanical crunching sound, which is just so cringeworthy. So to remedy this, you basically have 2 options. Now first, you can try and get yourself in the right gear before you even start cranking up a climb, but realistically, it's actually unlikely that you'll find the perfect gear for the entire climb, and also roads and trails tend to vary in grade over the course of a climb, and so it's more likely that you'll have to shift while ascending. Now the key to success here is to actually unload the system right before you shift so that there's minimal tension in the chain while the derailleur is physically moving the chain from one cog or chainring to another. Now it's very exaggerated here, but you can see the motions one by one as I shift to an easier gear as I climb up this hill. A couple of hard pedals to bring up the momentum, a momentary de-stressing of the drivetrain as I shift, then wait for the gears to fully engage before continuing to crank down. With enough practice, it becomes second nature, and you can kind of perform all these actions quickly in one fluid motion for smooth shifts even when climbing the steepest of grades. This is one pretty easy technique to aid in maximizing the life of your drivetrain and probably the best place to start. So number 2, cross-chaining is another totally avoidable habit that will prematurely eat away at your drivetrain. Cross-chaining happens on 2x or 3x drivetrains when the chain line is severely skewed by either riding in the big chainring and big cog or the small chainring and small cog. Now ideally speaking, your chain line would always be perfectly perpendicular to the axis of rotation of the bottom bracket and the rear axle. Now of course this isn't always possible, but severe cross-chaining places unnecessary stresses in the chain links and will prematurely wear your chain, leading to imprecise shifts and unwanted noises. Now preventing cross-chaining is actually pretty simple, and you should always practice awareness of your gear combinations as you ride. Now if you find that you're in your small chainring and you're running out of faster gears, instead of continuing to upshift to smaller and smaller cogs, shift up to the big chainring while simultaneously giving the rear mech a couple of clicks to the easier gears on the cassette. Now this will put you at about the same gear ratio, but now you'll have plenty of faster gears available without cross-chaining, as the entire chain is now biased further outboard, which aligns itself with the smaller or faster cogs on the cassette. Now the same principle applies when you're in the big chainring and you're running out of climbing gears. Instead of continuing to shift to the easier, bigger gears on the rear cassette, go ahead and downshift to the small chainring while simultaneously clicking the rear mech up a couple of gears harder, which will yield about the same gear ratio. Then you'll have plenty of easier gears left without cross-chaining, as the chain is now biased further inboard, aligning itself with the bigger, easier gears on the cassette. Now one thing to note here is that cross-chaining is one of the biggest criticisms of the 1x drivetrain, as there is no recourse for skewed chain lines on this type of system. Now if you do choose to run a 1x system, you will have to deal with some amount of cross-chaining when you're at the extreme ends of the cassette. It can be argued, however, that cross-chaining is not as severe as it could be on a 2x system, since the single chainring up front can be more centered with respect to the cassette, making the extremes less extreme than on its 2x or 3x counterparts. Number 3. So the first 2 tips were riding techniques and really best practices for maximizing the life of your drivetrain. But there are a few basic maintenance tips that are really easy to do and will have an equal effect on the longevity of your drivetrain. But keeping your drivetrain in adjustment is about the easiest thing you can do to keep your bike riding smoothly. Adjusting the derailleurs on the bike is fairly simple in theory, but if you're uncertain about how to do this, then I highly recommend taking your bike down to your local shop once every few months at minimum for a full drivetrain service to keep things running at their best. Now, if you're confident in your ability to keep your gears adjusted properly, then I also recommend investing in a hanger adjustment tool like this. The rear derailleur hanger is a sacrificial piece of pretty soft metal that serves as a buffer between your frame and your rear derailleur. Now, if you fall or drop your bike and the rear derailleur gets bashed, then it's the hanger that will deform rather than your precious frame. It's actually a pretty great concept, but it's fairly malleable by design. Now, I don't recommend doing this, but if you grab your rear derailleur, you can literally bend it side to side with a surprisingly little amount of force. So to make sure your hanger is always perfectly aligned, you use this tool which threads into the hanger and uses reference points around the perimeter of the rim to ensure alignment. Now, this one here is a pretty traditional hanger adjustment tool, and it does rely on your rear wheel being true and centered within the dropouts. But I did just learn about a new tool by Wolftooth Components that actually uses a pair of parallel alignment gauges, and this one doesn't rely on the wheel to make the adjustment. I'm pretty excited to try this out at some point, and I'll report back here on how it goes. Now, either way, the derailleur hanger alignment is often overlooked when adjusting derailleurs, and speaking from experience, if you've got a hanger that's out of whack, your efforts to tune your rear derailleur will be absolutely futile. So I highly recommend this tool if you plan to do your own drivetrain adjustments. All right, so number 4. Now this one is really about the easiest one you can do, yet I see countless bikes out there on the road with drivetrains that look like they've never once been cleaned or degreased. Now perhaps I'm not quite as particular about bike washing as Simon Richardson over on GCN, but I do appreciate a clean bike, and I make a strong effort to keep my bikes clean, mostly because it makes me happy. But there is undoubtedly a major benefit to keeping your drivetrain clean with regard to the longevity of your components, as fine dirt and grit really have a way of quickly wearing down moving parts. Now, I'm not saying you need to rip apart your whole drivetrain and do a deep clean after every ride, but a quick 5-minute wash with some biodegradable bike-specific cleaner does wonders to keep things shiny and smooth. Also, if you happen to be a road cyclist recently transitioning into the world of adventure and gravel cycling, then like me, you've also recently discovered that your bike seems impossible to keep clean, and you end up bringing dirt and grime home from all those trails and gravel roads you've been exploring. So if you're in this boat, then it becomes increasingly important to keep your precision drivetrain clean and free from the abrasive dirt and sand that we all love to explore. So on to number 5. This last one is really actually the easiest tip to do regularly, and that's to keep your clean drivetrain properly lubricated. There is, however, an entire spectrum of lubricants available, and finding the right one for you can be as personal as your choice of cycling shorts. Now, broadly speaking, lubricants come in a few different flavors. You got wet, dry, ceramic, and wax, with your basic wet and dry lubes being the most common. Now, I could probably do a whole video on proper lubrication for bikes, but very generally, your lube should match the riding conditions in your local area. So basically, if you ride in dry conditions, you should use a dry lube, and if you live in wet, soggy conditions, a wet lube is better for you. Now, a dry lube goes on the chain a bit thinner and dries, leaving sort of this thin, waxy lubricating film, and is better at repelling dirt, but it does need to be applied more regularly as it's a lighter lube. A wet lube, on the other hand, goes on much thicker, and while it tends to attract more grime, it doesn't need to be applied as frequently. Now, generally, I recommend using a dry lube unless you truly do ride in wet and muddy conditions for a good chunk of the year. And ideally speaking, you'll actually want to adjust your lubrication strategy as the seasons change. Now, either way, keeping your drivetrain nice and lubed is a fantastic way to prolong the life of your moving parts. Okay, so those are 5 easy ways to keep your drivetrain running smooth and to maximize its lifespan. You know, we spend so much time and money on our bikes, we really owe it to our components to keep them at their best. And really, it's not that hard. It just takes a little bit of effort, and over time, it'll become a regular part of your riding ritual, just like coffee and your post-ride Strava analysis. All right, so that's it for this one. Hopefully you found it helpful. Now, if you get a chance, you can explore this playlist of other technical how-tos up here, or you can take your chances on this random video down here that YouTube suggests for you. Anyways, thanks for watching, and thanks for subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.